I think the question I was asked the most often in 2020 was, when are we going back? Right? When are we going back to normal? When are we going back to the way things were? When are we going back to the office? And by the end of 2020, the answer was pretty apparent. The answer is, we're not. At least not all of us, and not all of the time. We're headed for a place where people have tasted of flexibility and, with some growing pains and a little burnout, made it work for them. And so we're not going back to all of that. I mean, even the members we serve, right? While we were trying to make sure essential workers were safe in production facilities, we were trying to move everything as remote as possible. So it's not only an issue for us, it's an issue for our members as well. And when the answer became, we're not, a new question emerged. The biggest question I got through the end of 2020 and even to today is, okay, so if we're gonna do this, what do we do about culture? What do we do to keep that same feel that we used to have? What do we do to make sure collaboration still happens, that people are still excited, that they're still bringing their best selves to work wherever that work is? And really our job as leaders, this is probably the biggest thing we shape, right? The culture of an organization, association, the culture of a team is one of the biggest influences a leader has on whether or not those people do their best work, whether or not they enjoy it, and whether or not we're ultimately a high-performing team or not. So today I want to share with you a couple insights on that. At a top level, I want to talk about what the research says about fully remote and hybrid and virtual teams. And most of this research, by the way, conducted BC, before Corona, because I think that's the best insight into what it's going to look like when it's normal, when kids are back in school, and so working from home doesn't mean hiding behind a folding screen that we bought at Lowe's, right? So we're gonna look at a lot of that. And when we look at the research on virtual teams, pre-pandemic virtual teams, whether they were in remote-first organizations or global organizations that just needed to put together project teams from multiple cultures, when we look at all of that research, we find that there's really 3 common traits around team culture that determine the ones that are successful making this shift and the ones that aren't. Those 3 traits are this: shared understanding, shared identity, and psychological safety. The teams that have a culture that is marked by a sense of shared understanding, shared identity, and psychological safety are the teams that thrive best in that remote environment. So my goal with you is to share some of this research, define these terms for you, because these are fancy, and in fact, some of these we've heard before. But I also want to give you some practical things you can do. I was going to say tomorrow, but it's Friday. I want to give you some practical things you can do Monday. I mean, I guess you could do it tomorrow. That is the world that we live in. Some practical things you can do to build these things: shared understanding, shared identity, and psychological safety. So let's define some terms. What's shared understanding? Shared understanding is the extent to which members of a team have a commonly held perspective on the team's expertise, assigned tasks, context, and preferences. And so some of this is making sure everybody knows what each other's roles and responsibilities are and what they're working on, for sure. But as you've probably sensed over the last year and a half, this context and preferences thing matters a lot, right? For some of us, the shift to remote wasn't all that bad. So I've been working remotely since the time that I left teaching in business school. I work out of an office that's in the basement of my house, and the only thing I did when the shift to everything fully remote happened is I bought a better camera because I sensed that I might need it for virtual conferences. Other than that, though, it was pretty easy. Other people have had to figure out how to divide up a kitchen table between 2 working spouses and 3 Zoom schooling kids and not, go insane. So the context people have been working in is different. And this won't change when things go back to normal. People have found different calendars that work for them now, and we need to make sure that each other are aware of that. They have different preferences for how they want to report what they're working on, how they want to make requests for help, et cetera. And we need to build that. That's what it means when we build this sense of shared understanding. So how can we build shared understanding on a team? Well, I'll give you a couple quick ideas that you can use. The first, if you haven't done it already, is to share calendars. And what I mean here, I have to be really cautious. What I mean here is not give everyone the ability to just mark a meeting on everyone else's calendar on the team. That's a recipe for disaster. That's not what I'm talking about. But you've probably noticed that you don't really work Monday through Friday from 9 to 5 anymore. You work at different times based on the needs of the rest of your family or your coworkers. People may have moved, right? During the pandemic, we saw a lot of different mobility. Well, if I'm going to work remotely for the time being, I might as well be where I really want to be instead of where I have to be. That means people are working different hours. So when I share calendars, what I mean is take the time with the team to actually say, these are the hours that are, I don't even like to use the term working versus non-working anymore. I prefer to think of it as these are the hours where I'm responsive versus non-responsive. Right? These are the hours where if you email me, you're not going to see anything till tomorrow, but these are the hours where you can email me and consider it like a synchronous communication. I mean, the single best thing you can do as a team is decide what are the blocks of time that are okay to schedule meetings, and what are the blocks of times where we might be inconveniencing people. And if we know that and we have that set on a team ahead of time, we don't run the risk of having these times that are really inconvenient to people and sending the message that they're maybe not as valuable a member of the team because we're not also accommodating them. That's what I mean when I say share calendars. In fact, share calendars a lot of times should be part of a broader conversation that I work with a lot of teams to develop, and that is to write what I sometimes call a working agreement or a social contract. If I'm feeling really feisty, I like to call it the Declaration of Interdependence, because it's really just a document that says we have to work together to get things done. Let's talk about the ways in which we need to work together. A working agreement is sometimes sort of that frequently unasked questions document. So let's actually have a conversation. Let's come together and let's answer all of those questions that we think we know the answer to, but people on our team disagree with. You know the ones I'm talking about. Like, what is a reasonable amount of time to wait for an email reply before we hit someone up with a text message or in the Slack channel or something like that? What is that reasonable amount of time? How do we want to keep each other updated on progress reports? What does busy in Microsoft Teams even mean, right? You would be amazed how many teams we can solve a lot of conflict when I'm working with them and just say, hey, there's 4 different statuses or 5 different statuses in Teams. Let's talk about what each one means. Does busy mean I'm in a meeting, or does busy mean I'm working, I just don't want to be disturbed right now? Different people have different ideas, and the point of a working agreement is to go question by question and come to an agreement with your team. This is what we agree that. We agree that 24 hours is a reasonable amount of time to wait for an email response. And if we wanted a faster response, we should use a different medium. We agree that busy means do not disturb. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm in a meeting. We agree that, we agree that. I love these documents too because I've found over the last year that they almost become a brilliant onboarding document. Right? Imagine joining a team and being handed this 4 or 5 page document with all of the questions that you actually spend the first couple weeks of your time with a team trying to figure out. Why are so many people replying all? Or why is no one replying all? All of those things get hashed out in that working agreement, and it can become a great onboarding document for an individual team. The last thing that I encourage a lot of teams to do that really builds a sense of shared understanding is what I sometimes call a huddle. In the world of software and agile development, if you've ever been a part of this, they sometimes call it the daily stand-up or the scrum. But the idea is on a regular basis, getting the whole team together and having them report back on what did I just work on, what am I focused on next, and what's blocking my progress. What did I just work on is a great way to keep tabs on how productive your people are without feeling like a digital version of a micromanager, right? What am I focused on now is a great way to make sure that nobody's dropping the ball, that all the tasks that are mission critical are actually getting covered. But my favorite question in this sort of 3-question format is what's blocking my progress? One of the biggest complaints I've heard from newly remote leaders is I feel like I don't lead a team anymore. I feel like I just manage 12 individual relationships, or I feel like I just manage 200 individuals. And the biggest reason is that when people need help, they usually just go right to the team leader. Whereas before, they would walk down the hall, tap the subject matter expert on the shoulder and say, can you help me? We're not doing that as much in this virtual environment for reasons that, to be honest with me, I don't fully understand. But I know the solution, which is to train your team to work out loud, to work in a way where everybody is aware of what each other is working on. That way, A, you're not seen as a micromanager always checking in on people because they're constantly broadcasting it. But B, when you phrase a question, not like who needs help with what am I working on and then what's blocking my progress? If that question is being answered on a regular basis to the whole team, you give an opportunity for those subject matter experts to opt in and provide that help. And that's one less individual help problem that you have to solve and one more bridge that's built between those 2 members of the team. It's one more step to feeling like you lead a team again. So this is shared understanding, but we also have to worry about shared identity. And to be honest, for your members, this is the biggest thing I'm worried about. I've worked with a lot of different manufacturing, defense contractors, people that have a production facility, but everything that wasn't essential is shifted to remote, and none of those people want to come back. It's my favorite email to get, by the way, is we serve out our employees and only 25% of them want to come back. Can you help? Well, it depends on what help you want. Can I convince them to come back? No. But I can talk about how we make this thing work. And the biggest problem for that, the sort of hybrid workforce, where maybe depending on the role you have, or depending on how remote you have, that affects how often you're there. That's going to build a crisis of shared identity. Shared identity is the extent to which team members feel they have the same sense of who they are as a designated group. They actually feel like a team. They feel bonded to each other, and they feel like they're actually a part of the mission. And this is not new. Every organization has had to deal with silos and politics and turf wars, right? I mean, have you ever put somebody from marketing and legal in the same room? You had to deal with silos and politics and turf wars, right? We've all had to deal with this. But if we don't do the hybrid thing right, if we don't focus on building shared identity, then we're headed to a place where the new silo becomes who's co-located more often, right? The people that I can see more often, I suddenly think of as more productive, or I suddenly rely on them more, even though they're not the person that can give me the best help. And we have this in-group and out-group. Sometimes with organizations, the in-group is actually the remoters, right? Because they're much more active in Slack or in Teams, and so they feel bonded to each other, and the people who are co-located are missing out. So this is what I mean when I say building that sense of shared identity. So how do we do that? A couple different ideas for you that have worked for fully remote companies and also hybrid companies. The first is my favorite word in the universe to say, fika. Fika is a Swedish word. It translates as just to have coffee. But as a ritual in Sweden, it's a much bigger thing. A fika is a time where you pull back from work and you interact either with a colleague or with an old friend, a family member, but it's okay in the afternoon to pull away from work and have a non-work conversation for a time. And almost every remote-first organization that I've worked with has some version of this, whether they call it fika or not. They might call it coffee talk. If they use Slack, there's a plugin called Donut that can make this happen for you. But the idea is people opt in and get randomized to having about a 30-minute non-work conversation once a week with somebody else on the team. And the importance of this is that when you're talking about stuff that's not work, you find uncommon commonalities. You find things that you have in common with other members of the team that would never come up in the context of work. And you end up building a little bit of a bond with them. Those bonds become friendships. Those friendships become an increase in a sense of identity with the team, a sense of shared identity. Now, some organizations I've worked with, what we do instead is instead of fika, we do a shared meal on a regular basis. So I'll give you an example. One organization, we started doing monthly Taco Thursdays. I know what you're thinking. But the first Thursday of every month, they would actually send a gift card out to their people and encourage them, go to your favorite local taco place, get whatever you want, bring it back, and we'll jump on a Zoom call and we'll have an hour-long conversation. It's a great icebreaker. What did you choose and why? Why did you choose the carnitas, or why did you do the vegetarian ones? I know what you're thinking. Why is it on Thursday and not Tuesday? Because Taco Tuesday would work so much better. I don't know. They wanted to do Thursday, and we just ran with it. But the idea is that we have this regular time where, again, call them that. You might just call them jargon. You might call them inside jokes. They're the little things that we do. A lot of them got left at the office. Now, these are lingo sometime. Like I noticed we talked a lot yesterday about the 4 pillars, right? The 4 pillars are they're not a ritual, but they're a term that everyone in this group understands. And as a result, you feel more bonded to each other. But there's other little rituals that go on as well. So building out virtual versions of those rituals can become important too. I worked with a team where basically what they did was they decided to stop using the raised hand or the applause emojis in Zoom and instead would just reenact them live. So if you made a great point and somebody wanted to give you applause, they would give you the silent clapping motion from American Sign Language, which, by the way, when you're working with the team is really disorienting, right? Because you're staring at the whole Brady Box grid of faces and all of a sudden everybody's doing this, but they notice each other and they know what that ritual, that motion means. And as a result, they feel more bonded to each other. So think about the ones maybe you already have. Maybe it's inside jokes. Maybe it's jargon. It's just little things that we do, the signal that we're in this in-group together, that people who are a part of our association or the members we serve who are part of their companies, things that they understand that maybe the outsiders don't. And we haven't really had the time to enjoy. All right, the last one, psychological safety, real fast. I heard Nicole talk about this yesterday, and I think it's brilliant, right? Psychological safety, just to find the term for you, it's the extent to which team members feel safe to express themselves and take risks. This is, on all the sessions I've sat in for the past 2 days, this is the one common thread I'm seeing in almost everything. Except that cybersecurity one, that's just about straight safety. But if we want to talk about innovation and risk-taking, we have to talk about psychological safety, because if people don't feel safe to express themselves and take risks, they don't take them, and we don't learn anything. But even if we want to talk about DEI initiatives, if people are coming and we're recruiting a more diverse workforce and yet they don't feel safe to express themselves, what's the point? And we know the research, Nicole shared it was brilliant on innovation and on the moral case for psychological safety, the team feeling better, feeling more. But I'll make a capitalist case for you, if you will. I'll just make a pure capitalist case for psychological safety. You have members of your team that you are paying a salary. And if they don't feel psychologically safe, you're not getting your money's worth. What do I mean by that? Well, we're paying them a salary based on their knowledge, skills, and abilities, their ability to create value, make something happen for the organization. And if they don't feel safe to speak up when they disagree, if they don't feel safe to take risks, if they don't feel safe to point out something they might feel is going wrong, they're self-censoring themselves, and you're not getting the full benefit of their knowledge, skills, and abilities. And by the way, if that goes on for too long, you're not getting them either. They're going to invite themselves to be successful working for a different association that'll give them that sense of psychological safety. Now, we know this is important. Why do I bring it up in the context of remote work? It's that it's harder. It's harder to speak up on a Zoom call. It's harder to express dissent in a flurry of reply-alls where everyone disagrees. It's harder to be that one person that goes, oh, slow down, are we sure we checked this? So how do we build that sense of psychological safety no matter where we are? Give you a couple ideas. The first is a reframe, not a specific action, and that is to treat conflict as collaboration. Jay, I loved when you talked about this yesterday, that we need to change the discourse. I think a lot of the problem nationwide, but also inside of organizations, is that anytime somebody disagrees with us, we draw a line and then we have to prove our point about why we're right and they're evil. But in reality, most of the time when people speak up, they're actually saying, I care so much about the success of this project, and I see something that I think might head us in the wrong direction, and so I am going to take that risk to speak up. And if we have that mindset, now there are some people that are just constant downers or whose conflict is very, very person-based, and those are the people that you would have to invite to go be successful at a different association, right? So we're not talking about that. But those people that speak up because they disagree about where a project, the task-focused conflict, we need to recognize as a form of collaboration. The second one is to celebrate failures. And I'm not saying, like, congratulations, you lost $200,000 of our money, here's a trophy. Although I'm on the borderline of millennial and Gen Z, and sometimes trophies, they make me feel good. But what I mean by celebrate failure is that anytime we take a risk and it doesn't work, we learn something. You know, I was a practitioner of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for a really long time. Well, I still am, but I've been doing it for 15 years, and we have a saying that you don't ever lose a match in competition. You win or you learn. And I think we need that same approach when members of our team try something and it fails. We don't just say, you know, here's what you got wrong. We say, okay, what did we learn from that? And then we say, thank you for taking that risk. Because if you didn't, we never would have learned that, right? And the last thing I would encourage you to do is to encourage dissent, encourage people to actually speak up if you haven't already, right? Take it on yourself. I was a full-time business school professor for the better part of a decade, and I learned something really interesting about MBAs. They're people too, and just like people, they don't really like to ask questions. So I'd give a lecture for 45 minutes, and I'd talk about all these different motivational theories, and then I'd say, okay, any questions? Silence. You've been in those meetings, I'm sure. So I flipped the script a bit, and I would say stuff like, okay, I've talked to you for 45 minutes, I've talked about this and this, but I'm sure that I missed something, I'm sure that I top-lined something, I'm sure that I wasn't clear, so what questions do you have for me? That little flip from any questions to what questions do you have for me broke that tension, unleashed that flood of questions that was already there. People just didn't want to take the risk of looking dumb and asking it. A dissent in teams works the same way. Take it on yourself as the leader. Okay, it feels like we're headed towards consensus, but I might be missing something. I have my biases, I have my past experiences. What am I missing? Does anybody see anything I'm missing? Encourage those people to speak up. So treating conflict as collaboration, celebrating failures, encouraging dissent. That'll help us build psychological safety, which along with shared identity and shared understanding will help us build a culture that'll survive no matter where we are. Now, if you want to go deeper on this real quick, we have two things for you. I did a virtual session yesterday that you all get to watch virtually. We recorded it. So I'd encourage you to do that. If you're watching on the app, it's there as well. I also, as I said, I published this book, Leading from Anywhere, in January of this year to help people manage this transition. I only have one copy because I'd carry on, but if you give me a business card or if you're virtual, you connect with me in the app, I'd love to just mail you one. If it helps with your association, I'd just love to hear the great story that comes of it. But no matter what you do, right, whether you go deeper or not on this, I would encourage you. Start focusing with your team and start encouraging your members to focus with their teams to build shared understanding, shared identity, and psychological safety. I wish I could tell you the exact percentage of people that are going to want to come back to the office, but it changes by the day and it changes by the team. But I can tell you this one thing, that if you build that sense of shared understanding, shared identity, and psychological safety, you'll build a culture that works well no matter where it works. The only thing I know for certain is that the future of work isn't home or the office, it's working from anywhere. And if you build those three pillars, you'll have the skills you need to lead from anywhere as well.